This episode is brought to you by my fertility awareness programs. Master fertility awareness and improve your menstrual cycle health at the same time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for more information. That's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 184. Welcome to the 184th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I recently created a free 3-part video series all about the fertility awareness method and how you can utilize the fertility awareness method to develop body literacy. So to really connect you with your cycles and really understand what's happening in your body. And so if you haven't had a chance to get your copy of my free video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to gain access to my 3-part video series all about fertility awareness charting. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. I'm excited to share with you today the latest edition of my Fertility Awareness Reality Series. I love doing the sessions because it really gives a window into what fertility awareness educators do, what it really looks like when you're learning to chart, what it looks like when you're kind of in the trenches, really getting used to it. So this is a great episode. Today I have Aubrey on the show, and she has recently come off of hormonal contraceptives. So at the time of this recording, it is February, beginning of February, and she just came off of hormonal birth control in September. So she's been off of hormonal birth control for this is her 4th cycle that we're talking about in today's episode. And so it gives you just a sense of what it looks like when you're coming off and just what it's like to chart right afterwards, because it's not always as straightforward as you would like it to be, but it really depends on the woman because each woman's experience is going to be different. And just as a reminder that none of the information that is presented here today in this episode or any of the episodes of the podcast is intended as medical advice. All of the clients who I work with their own practitioners. They have medical doctors. Many of my clients have functional practitioners that they're working with also. And so I'm one of the professionals on their team. You'll always get the best results if you're working with a skilled practitioner to support you in any of the changes that you're making. In my work with clients, I find that women find me in different stages of their fertility awareness journey. So some of the women that I work with find me when they are just discovering fertility awareness for the very first time and are really looking for support with charting to help them get down the basics so that they can really understand how to do it, how to chart cervical mucus, how to check cervical position, how the whole basal body temperature thing works. And with some of the other women that I work with, I also work with women who have quite a bit of experience charting, who've been perhaps charting their cycles for several months or even a year or more, and often are looking for specific support with some of the nuances. So although they get the general concept, there's often a few specific things that just have never really clicked and have never really made sense and are preventing them from really feeling confident about either using the method for birth control or if there are certain things in their cycle that they're just wanting to figure out what it means. And so wherever you fit on that spectrum, I have something for you. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme to take a look at the different programs that I offer. And if you're not sure which program would be the best fit, make sure to set up a complimentary 15-minute consultation with me so that we can actually talk about which program would work best. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. Now let's jump into today's episode. And I'm really excited to welcome my guest, Aubrey, to the show. Aubrey is a member of my current Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program. She's in my conception group, and this is actually our first session together. So at this stage, we are 4 weeks in. I believe we've had 4 weeks together. So we still have a bit more than half of the program together, but I'm really excited to have this opportunity to chat with Aubrey so early in the program so that we can really start to hash out your cycles. So welcome to the show, Aubrey.
Hi.
Well, excited to have you here. And so I thought we could start just by introducing you a bit to the audience. So maybe you could share when you had your first period, what that was like, and if you have a history of hormonal birth control, kind of how, like if you used it and how many years, we could start there.
Okay. I was 12 when I got my first period. I remember what I was wearing, black pants and a blue shirt. And I went into the bathroom and I just used some toilet paper and that was that. And I was regular. I didn't have cramps until I went to college. I didn't use any hormonal birth control until I was like 21, I think. But when I went to college, I like left home and immediately got a ton of acne. And I mention this because I think it's relevant to my cycle. Because as soon as I went on hormonal birth control at about 21, I got rid of all my acne and my skin was like super clear. And I told my doctor at the time, I was like, I want the one that's going to get rid of my acne. So I was on Yaz, like a generic version of Yaz. And then I went off of it because I had a girlfriend instead of a boyfriend, and then went back on it another year later and stayed on it probably until, I don't know, I took another like 6-month hiatus until this year in September when I went off of it officially.
Okay. And I have noted that you took it for about 7 years. Is that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so why did you decide to go off of it?
We'd gotten married and we went to Iceland on a honeymoon, and then I'd run out of my prescription. So then I went to the doctor, but that was like in September. So that was August. And I realized that I was like having feelings. I like cried for a straight week because I like felt how I was feeling, and my boobs were more sensitive and I was actually wanting to have sex. And so then that kind of started me thinking, was like, what's going on? And Michael, my partner, and I have always talked about like, he doesn't like that I had to take hormones just so that we wouldn't get pregnant, because he doesn't think it's natural and I don't either. And so he was kind of open to the idea of transitioning off of it. And then, so I went on it again for a month in September, but then we got married and talked to a friend who had like really hard conception, like IVF, multiple rounds. And she was like, well, if you want a baby and it takes a long time, you might as well know sooner rather than later. And we talked about it and decided to start trying to conceive, start trying until I think the 3rd cycle I was off of it. So yeah.
Okay.
Long story short, that's why I went off.
Okay. So you came off of hormonal birth control then in September. So it's been about like 3 months or so?
Yep.
Okay.
No, yeah. Yeah.
3 months-ish, or September, October?
No, because it was my last month on was September. So October, roughly the end of September, I was off. So yes, okay. October, November, December.
And could you share a little bit about what your experience has been so far? Did your period come back right away?
My period did come back right away. I guess like the first thing I noticed was that I wanted to actually have sex again. I had more cervical mucus, like breast sensitivity, I guess you could say. But then I was also charting on like an app. And then that kind of led to me being like freaked out and scared because my basal body temperatures were insane. So I was like watching them go all over the place, and like they drew a cover line on this app and it was like totally wrong. But I didn't have enough information to know that the first month off of birth control would be not normal, like set of hormones that I was looking at. So that like led me to freak out and think about all the things I had to change in my life. And that kept going on for, I would say until like this last cycle. My temps and stuff looked more like what a typical chart would look like. And my mucus patterns were more like a typical mucus pattern. But like this cycle, I think for sure my basal body temperatures are more normal, especially since I know now I have to leave my thermometer in for 10 minutes to warm it up. But also, I don't know about the mucus patterns because I'm still having kind of a hard time with that.
Okay, well, we'll definitely get into that. And just so that I get a sense from you, so what are the kind of the big things, the big questions that you have today, or the main topics that you want to make sure that we talk about on our call today?
I would like for sure to talk about semen elimination and making sure that I'm doing it right. There were a couple of days this last cycle that I was like, but that kind of looks like a bunch of semen that just came out like a day later. Tips for remembering mucus sensations. I have a hard time remembering if I have like a shiny tissue twice, but a smooth sensation once, like what is then do I only mark it one time? I don't know. And then figuring out my peak day, stamps, I'm still kind of confused about, and potential excess mucus after ovulation that I'm noticing.
Okay. So lots on the docket.
Lots.
Which is
Sorry.
good. Yes. So let me just pull up some of the previous charts. So as you mentioned, when you first go off of hormonal contraceptives, yeah, you can expect the first couple charts to be a little wonky, and it really depends on the woman. So fortunately, your periods came back right away. I would say having mucus or having basal body temperature that's a little bit spiky and maybe a little bit hard to read isn't necessarily that uncommon. And I think part of it is just the hormonal changes, but part of it is also the technique, like in terms of how you're checking and all of that. Because we talked about in the group, but I often find that when I start working with somebody, the temperatures tend to be a little bit, not all the time, but enough of the time that I've started to realize that it's a thing. And then once we sort out the temperature taking, then it actually seems to level off a little bit. So I've pulled it up. So of course, the listeners are not able to see your chart. What I've pulled up is your first charts. This is September to October, and then October to November, and November to December. So I see what you mean. Like the charts were kind of zigzagging, like your temperature kind of up and down a little bit. And a little, even though they're zigzaggy, still a little on the low end. So we're seeing temperatures that are all, like the pre-ovulatory temperatures are all pretty much under 97.2 Fahrenheit. And so we'd want to see those closer to 97.3 and above, all of them.
And I think after I joined the group, I learned about how digital thermometers need to warm up. And so I think they might still be low right now. I guess I am kind of worried about my temperatures now, but once I put the thermometer in my mouth for 10 minutes, they did seem to get closer to 97.3, most of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also it's not uncommon for, say, thyroid function to be a little bit depressed right off of the bat when you come off of hormonal contraceptives. So you want to give your body some time to see if it rebounds. And if you still continue to see the low temps, then it's worth looking into. And so, were you going to say something?
I wanted you to know that the paper chart that I just sent you, I also inputted that into the Just Tease app this afternoon.
Okay.
So if you don't want to look at that.
Okay. Well, just for the listeners, Aubrey took a picture of her paper chart and emailed it to me. So we're both looking at it. So it's great. So let's take a look at your cycles. So I see what you mean. It's hard for me to read. So you have 3 charts. And what app is this that you were using?
Glow.
Okay. So 3 charts on the Glow app. And so the challenge for fertility educators like me with the apps is that it doesn't always give me as much information about the mucus. So I could see the temperature and I could see the shift.
I agree.
But then the mucus, it's kind of hard for me to know what's going on just because the Just Tease method has a different mucus category situation going on. So tell me
I've noticed that too, actually.
Yeah, once you kind of switch over methods, all of a sudden it kind of makes sense why I encourage you to give it a try while we're in the class together. So tell me about your mucus observations since you've come off of the pill. And was it the pill that, because you said it was a version of Yaz, like a...
Yep, the pill. I think when I first went off of it, I was just like, I don't know what I was doing to figure it out. I think I might have been doing the taking charge of your fertility method where you actually stick your finger in your vagina and swipe for mucus. So this current cycle is the only cycle. No, that's not true. The last cycle I did the Just Tease method probably midway through my pre-ovulatory phase to the end, but I was marking it with the app. So anything that was like an X would be part of the drive, but it doesn't give enough information. I agree. So, but I also do remember having a really hard time because we were trying to conceive and we were having a lot of sex. I did not know how to use the semen elimination technique. So I was having a lot of days where I was like, I don't see any mucus coming on the tissue at all, even though I was like, I knew that I had seen it like the day before, but then we'd have sex and then the next day it would be like, and now I'm dried up. Is that normal?
It is.
Or like,
to some extent, it depends. Like it is kind of with the asterisk, like it depends. So you may find, like after I tell you this, like you can kind of look for it, notice it. But so what happens when you have sex during your fertile window is that your cervical crypts, so when you have cervical mucus, the mucus pulls sperm into the cervical crypts, and then they kind of hold the sperms. They're kind of like a sperm holding situation. And so there is some kind of suggestion that, yeah, it can be a little bit, but it just depends, because I say that to say like it's possible that then the next day you may not see as much. But at the same time, if you're in the middle of your fertile window and your fertile window typically lasts several days, you would also it would also be normal to continue seeing cervical mucus. So it kind of depends. So going back to the other question, so obviously I don't have the specific like what you saw every day, but during those first 3 months, were you seeing obvious cervical mucus observations? Like were you having egg white quality or like a lubricative sensation or for a couple of days? Like do you remember what you were seeing or if you saw any?
I believe I did have the egg white mucus. I think the first month I might have wanted to see it, but then the next 2 cycles after that I for sure did, although it wasn't not as much as this month, which I'm not sure what that's about. If that's my body still adjusting or...
Okay, so in this cycle, so you had your period and you mentioned that the color is a little brown.
Right. And I feel concerned about that, but I don't know if I should be.
Well, I think it's a little, it's something to be aware of and to note. I don't know that at this stage of the game. So there's a number of changes that take place once you come off of hormonal contraceptives, and there's research to show that it does take your body a little bit of time to just get back to normal hormonal production and everything. It's hard for me to tell exactly when you ovulated on some of these charts. Let me take a peek here. Did you get a sense of how long your luteal phase has been in the past couple of charts?
I think about 12 days.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, which is pretty good. And have you been having any spotting before your period, or has it just been consistent?
I don't think I've had spotting before my period, but I have started like with a light day of period.
Okay. And so on the light, so like on this chart, so this is the most recent chart for the listeners who cannot see the chart. So this started in January. So this is like real time here. And so how much are you seeing on the light day? So your period started on Wednesday. You put that it was light. What does that look like?
In my cup, I would say it's like maybe a quarter, probably less than a quarter full.
Okay.
When I dump it from like a whole day of wearing it.
Okay. And then what is a moderate day like?
Like I would say midway up to the cup.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair amount of bleeding. Like it's given then.
Should I call it?
Pardon?
Should I call it heavy?
No.
Should those medium days be called heavy?
I don't think so. I wouldn't consider, it just depends on, moderate, like it's all kind of subjective.
Relative. Yeah.
So I would consider that to be moderate. I would consider heavy to be more like you're almost filling a whole cup, like 3/4 of a cup or something like that. But you marked it as moderate. So you had a sense that, like, did it feel heavy to you or did it feel moderate to you?
I think it felt moderate.
Yeah. Because then that means for the whole day, you basically didn't have to change the cup. And the whole day you had about half. Yeah. So that.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of typical of me. I can like put it in for a whole day and not have to worry about changing it at work at all.
Yeah. Which is so convenient.
Right.
So you mentioned that you and your husband then actively trying right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Not today, but this cycle, yes.
Okay. And were you actively, so all of these hearts, these are real hearts, like legit hearts. Okay.
Yep.
And for anyone who doesn't know what I mean when I say heart, that's usually in the apps. That's usually the mark for the sex. And if the heart is full, it means that there was sex without protection. So that's why I'm just clarifying. Okay, so let's look at your chart here. So you have your period a couple of light days afterwards. So your period is within normal range. We have like 4 days of bleeding and a couple days of spotting. And then you go into several days that you're not seeing any mucus. So they're dry or smooth. And then it looks like here you go into your fertile window. So you are having days where you're seeing mucus that you can stretch, sometimes clear, sometimes cloudy, sometimes a combination.
Yes.
And so it looks like you ovulated then around day 21. And so now you're in your luteal phase here. And after ovulation, you had a couple of days of mucus.
Right.
And so that was one of your questions, like, why am I seeing mucus? So,
yeah.
I mean, what I would say, it looks like the mucus that you saw is of a different quality than the mucus before, or was it? Did you notice a difference?
Yeah, the days, the last 2 or 3 days were gummy mucus, I thought, and that was very different. It was almost like my cervix was like coughing something up, and it was like a surprising full tissue of like super stretchy, springy stuff. Like I was kind of stretching it and it flew off my fingers.
Because it was kind of like gummy?
Icky-ish. Yeah.
And what color was it?
It was like a cloudy clear combination. And then it was like one time was cloudy and then the other time was both.
Okay. Well, so we've already talked a lot about cervical health in our group. And so that's something that we're going to want to watch. So typically if we see gummy mucus, it can be a sign of inflammation. And so for anyone who's listening and you're not sure what I mean by gummy mucus, so it's cervical mucus that has a quality about it where it seems like it's not very liquidy. So typically mucus is water, it has more of a higher water content. And typically it's more like fluid. Whereas when mucus is gummy, it's kind of like that sticky stuff on the back of a credit card where you can kind of pull it and it's like gum and it doesn't quite, like it's not liquid, just so that the audience has a description of it. So when your cervix is producing mucus like that, then it can indicate inflammation. And so we're going to want to do a few things just to support cervical health. So one of just in general, when you're coming off of hormonal contraceptives, one of the things that you are going to want to focus on is to replenish some of the nutrients that have been depleted while you were on it. And so in particular, some of the nutrients that are depleted by the pill include like B vitamins, so like B12, B6, and folate in particular. And so with some of those nutrients, the longer that you're on it, the nutrient depletion can kind of build up. And so you may want to consider like a B complex. I know you're taking desiccated liver.
Yes, I am.
And it may just resolve because this could be related to just recently coming off of hormonal contraceptives. So just something we want to watch. If it's something that continues. And then it can also be related to food sensitivities. But the first thing you want to kind of rule out is just inflammation.
Okay. I think on one of those gummy days, I did check my cervix and it felt, I didn't take a note of it, but it felt like there was almost like, I don't even know, like not ridges, like smaller than ridges, maybe a light sandpapery feel, like little bumps, but not like bumps. And I'd never felt that before. And I remembered you said that it could be a cervical health issue. So does that kind of prove that? Or?
Well, that's something that you'll definitely want to have checked. So it's hard to know what that is. So yeah, at this stage, I would say go in, have a check. Have you had a PAP recently?
I did in August and it came back normal. And I did check the next day and it was gone. Like that weird feeling was gone.
Oh, so it was just like one day it was like that and then it wasn't like that anymore.
Yeah. I don't know.
And is it possible that your cervix, you know how we talked about how the cervix moves positions? Is it possible that the cervix moves positions and maybe, yeah.
I was feeling something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
But I mean, that's enough for me to say, you know what, if you felt something and you were kind of concerned about, like, it's enough for me to say, well, because if there's no harm in getting a check and then at least you know. So,
okay.
So I'm just going to check. So before our session, you sent me in your form. And so you mentioned that sometimes it's hard to identify the sensation. So it looks like you're comfortable. So you're comfortable with the lubricative sensation when you're wiping and dry. Is that right? And the smooth is a little bit more challenging?
Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's because it happens like on a day where I also have dry wipes. And so then I can't remember I can't remember two things at once, like what kind of mucus and how many times and the sensation, or yeah, I don't know why I question if is that lubricative or not? I guess right now, because I know I'm in my luteal phase, I'm like telling myself it's definitely not lubricative. It's just, I don't know why. But.
Well, so my suggestion is to call it like you see it. So you can't decide on the sensation you're supposed to have. You just have to go with the sensation you do have. So that's when you get into trouble. So I know currently you're trying to conceive, but there'll probably be a point when you are spacing or something. And so you want to get in the habit of not so all of the expectations you have, you can just throw those out the window. And so every time you wipe, it's going to be one of three options. It's either going to be dry, smooth, or lubricative. So I always say like dry and lubricative are obvious. Dry is like obvious. So when you're wiping, it's scratchy. And you've experienced lubricative. So what does that feel like?
I don't know. Like, I guess the tissue for sure, it just like slides back a lot faster. And I know when I look at the tissue, before I look at it, I know I'm going to be able to see something on it because of how it moved so quickly across my perineum.
So it's like if it's slippery, like it glides quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So then in terms of smooth is in a way obvious by default because smooth is not dry and it's not lubricative.
Okay.
So it's kind of like you're wiping. It's almost like you're wiping and there's some lotion there. So it's like it's still not really slippery, but it's not dry.
Okay.
And so on the days where you have different observations, what you record is quote unquote the most fertile sign. So we already talked about how, we consider all mucus fertile regardless of the type. So the word more fertile then seems like a contradiction, but you get the point. So if you see clear, stretchy mucus on one, like in the morning, and then you see some lotiony, cloudy, not as stretchy mucus later on, then you would know the clear, stretchy mucus for that day, even though you saw both types. So if you have, it's dry most of the day, and then you have like a smooth, then you could record the smooth. And then if you're seeing because I know you have here that you saw some shiny observations, and then there was a day that you saw like a damp. So so you would just write down, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just keep in mind kind of loosely, like I'm writing down the most quote unquote fertile sign and then how many times you saw it. I don't know if that helps. Does that help? It's a little trickier on the dry days, but I would just say like if you wipe most of the day and it's shiny and dry, and then you wipe like once and it's smooth, then put the smooth down as the most quote unquote fertile sign, and then however many times like if it was smooth and shiny, then you just kind of smooth shiny times 1, if that makes sense. Okay,
because I think that's the part where I get confused because I can see mucus like 4 times. Or not, it's one dry sensation, and then but the mucus is the same, and then it's like I second guess myself, like, were those previous ones actually a dry sensation, or was I feeling smooth all day long? So I think I need to record what I actually feel and not what I think I should feel.
Yeah. And so that's why it's really important to decide on the sensation before you actually look at the tissue. So that's there's reason behind that suggestion. So it's like, close your eyes if you have to, but decide on that sensation first, because if you don't, then you just start to question yourself. So this is not a game of perfection because there's no such thing as a perfect chart. You're a journalist. We're looking for an objective report on what you saw. So that if you can think of yourself that way, then there's no right answer here.
Okay.
And so sometimes the observations don't line up. Like if you have a really tiny bit of mucus, sometimes it doesn't feel lubricative because you just don't have very much and it feels dry. And then you look at, or it feels smooth even, and you look at the tissue and there's like a tiny bit of stretchy mucus. Well, you just write it down as you see it, as far as I'm concerned. You still know the significance of the stretchy, clear mucus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that it means that it's a fertile day. So, and that's kind of, hopefully that's helpful. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going to write down what you see and get in the habit of that.
All right. Sounds good.
But yeah, like I'm really encouraged to see your chart. Like it's starting to, you can tell that it's starting to kind of organize itself. So you had your first period, refresh my memory again, when you were how old?
12.
12. So you had 9 years of your cycle just kind of doing its thing before you went on the hormones for the first time. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Although I just remembered, I was like, when I was 15, I kind of went on a terrible diet and I stopped my period for like probably 6 months. I read a book that my mom had in the house and it was like, well, bodybuilding, which is awesome because I was like, yeah, muscles, not skinny. But then the recommended daily fat allowance was 20 grams of fat, which now in my like normal current life is like, that is insane and super unhealthy, which I'm pretty sure that's why I didn't get my period for such a long time. So yeah, except for that 6-month period, I had like regular cycles. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, arguably your body was responding as we would expect it to the stress of the diet that you had been. So your body was responding in a perfectly normal way to the situation. I always like to reframe that because we always think like there's something wrong with my body, but it's like maybe your body's great. And it's just responding normally to the stressors of the situation. And if we think about it that way, then it makes sense because it's like then once you stop the diet, your cycles came back.
Okay.
That's just an observation that I'm making because it's something that I see. It's something that I've spoken about on the podcast, as you probably know, which is that one of the challenges for women who are going on hormonal contraceptives like quite soon after they had their first period is that their cycles didn't have a chance to mature. And so when they come off of hormonal birth control, it can take a little longer before their patterns start to normalize because their cycles are still growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in your case, you were already a grown woman, 21, like you're from a reproductive standpoint, having had 9 years of regular, even with the dietary issue, like you weren't on a hormone, so you still had 9 years of cycling. So your cycles actually had a chance to mature before you went on it. And that could be why within 3 months we're seeing, it's still like, obviously we're still seeing, I feel like with the mucus pattern, like I think we'll see potentially a little bit more mucus once your cervix starts to kind of heal and adjust from being on the hormones. Because I'm seeing on the days that you're seeing peak mucus, you're seeing the observation maybe once or twice. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And I feel like that's a little bit different than maybe last cycle. Like I saw the stretchy clear more than once last cycle. I don't know why that would be, but yeah. Okay. I'll keep looking for that as a good sign.
Yeah. And so how has the routine been? So have you found it to be okay checking before and after you go to the bathroom and throughout the day? Has that been okay or has that been challenging?
Yeah, I think since I started last cycle, mid-cycle, I've had about a month and a half now to practice. And so it's definitely coming a lot more natural. I just find that I always have to go to the bathroom so badly by the time I get there. It's like, oh, don't sit down yet. Grab your toilet paper, quick wipe, and then figure it out. So, which maybe also has something to do with like why I don't remember the sensation as much because I'm like, okay, now I can go, because I'm a teacher. And so we get like 2 bathroom breaks a day.
Oh my goodness. Yes. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say if there's a way for you to make a mental note. So mental notes is often with tricks. I'm just a silly person by nature and I'm always singing to my kids. So I would probably come up with some silly like, D is for dry, S is for smooth. And like actually like say that to myself so that I remembered. But that kind of stuff helps. So you could just think of something. I mean, you're a teacher, so you teach the kinders.
Yeah.
Anyway, so next time you go to the bathroom and you wipe and it's dry, in your head you'll be like, D is for dry. You'll be like, oh my goodness, I'll be right there in the bathroom with you. It'll be kind of awkward. But I'll help you remember. Yeah. But yeah, something like that can help just because all you need to do is earmark it. Like kind of like when you meet somebody and they tell you your name. If you don't rhyme it with something, you're not remembering it.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should just visualize the letter because that usually helps me. When I can like spell someone's name in my mind, that helps me.
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. And did you had a question for me about, let me just take a peek at my notes. Tips for remembering sensation. So yeah. And then the number of times, like for me when I'm doing it, it's kind of like a tally. Like I kind of, so yeah. And then you could do the same thing where you actually visualize the numbers. If you saw it, if this is the second time, you can like visualize the two.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably all you need to do. And by the end of the day, then you'll remember. Some of my clients will actually kind of, it depends on what type of app they use. So a lot of my clients use Kandara or Glow or whatever the app, but they, especially at the very beginning stages, like the first couple of charts when this is all new, some of my clients will actually go in and write in the comments. So every time they see an observation, they'll just make a quick note, but I'm not recommending that. Like everyone doesn't have to do that, but that's another suggestion if you're finding, we all always have our phones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned also about your peak day. So one thing that I wanted to mention as well. So what we're seeing here, then we see your mucus pattern leading up to ovulation, and then we're still seeing a little bit of mucus. The quality of it changed because it changed to gummy, but we're still seeing a little bit of mucus afterwards. So just to kind of talk a little bit about why that might be. So coming off of hormonal contraceptives, it's not uncommon for your hormone levels not to be necessarily as high as they would be. So it's not uncommon for the progesterone potentially to be a little bit on the lower side. We don't know for sure if that's the case. I'm not seeing a lot of the classic symptoms of that, which would be a short luteal phase or premenstrual spotting. But in order to shut down your mucus production, the progesterone has to rise to a certain level. So if we're seeing that you're still producing a little bit of mucus for several days, I mean, it's not too bad. So ovulation happened, I would mark ovulation to say happen here on day 21. Day 22, you had some mucus. Day 23, and then it looks like just once you had an observation. So the 3 days after, and then so on day 25, it looks like you had some non-peak mucus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So overall, that's not something that I would be overly concerned about. I feel like as your levels normalize, then maybe the progesterone will start rising a little faster and kind of shut down that production a little sooner. So
okay.
Peak day is the last day that we have mucus with peak qualities. So in your case, we are seeing mucus with peak qualities past ovulation. But I feel like we're still seeing a shift in the quality of what we're seeing. So I would imagine that that's something that, like, once being that this is the fourth chart off of hormones, I feel like we can watch that and see. And then if it's not normalizing, then one of the challenges when you're charting is, especially when you're charting with a method that's this specific, is that we're looking at everything under a microscope and kind of assuming that something's wrong if everything doesn't look quote unquote perfect. So just to kind of keep in mind that, so peak day is not always ovulation day. So the majority of the time a woman will ovulate on her peak day, but there is a certain percentage of women that would ovulate up to 2 days before her peak day, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the things that, like, so the reason that I need to know my peak day is because I need to know when I ovulated.
So peak day is helpful for a couple of reasons. When you're trying to conceive, it's good to be able to identify your peak day because it is highly correlated with ovulation. And so in order to optimize your chances of conceiving, you want to have sex on all the days of, like, not all the days, but any days of peak mucus are optimal for fertility. And then also peak day, but you don't know that it's your last day of mucus with peak qualities on that day. So when you identify that it's your peak day and you know that ovulation can happen, so the majority of the time it'll happen on peak day, and then there's a percentage of the time that it'll happen like plus or minus 1, and then a very small percentage of women might ovulate up to 3 days after. So in your case, we're having you ovulate and then we're still seeing a couple of days of peak. So because we know that it's around there, it can help you to time sex because it tells you, or that's what it's helpful for when you're trying to conceive. When you're avoiding pregnancy and you're using the method for birth control, it's important because we use that as part of the rules to identify how to extend the fertile window. So when you identify that it's your last day of peak mucus, we do the count of 3 after that to make sure that you're not, like, to make sure that we've identified your fertile window. And then we also use that in conjunction with your temperature.
Okay, so if my temperature rises, that does indicate ovulation. Yeah. I guess that's where I'm getting thrown off, is because
it's not lining up.
Especially, it's not necessarily lining up, and my mucus does not match.
Yeah. So in this, in this case, I would say that it is likely just because your body is still sorting itself out. I feel like, based on my experience, based on the charts that I've seen working with different women, it's not uncommon to have your mucus kind of continue post-ov, like once you've just come off of hormonal contraceptives. So let's take a peek at what we're talking about here. So I see here that you did note that your mucus was gummy once before ovulation.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting to me is, so I've said it a couple times, like ovulation looks like it was around day 21. And then on day 22 and day 23, both those days we have this gummy mucus. And so the quality of the mucus is different. So up until then, you had typical peak mucus from what I'm seeing here. Like it was cloudy and clear and it was like typical mucus. So if this type of pattern continues, so just to share some information, I have worked with a number of clients who have continued to see mucus observations after ovulation. And so that, like, it's kind of more of an advanced charting protocol where if we were to, so we're seeing this now, like your next chart at the end of the cycle, one of two things is going to happen. So either you're going to be pregnant or we're going to have another cycle. So if we have another cycle and a couple cycles after that, if we continue to see that your body is producing mucus and it's obviously like a different quality, like mucus that is gummy is obviously not optimal for fertility because it's like gum. So it's obviously not going to help the sperm swim through. Like we still have to consider it a fertile day. Like if you were avoiding pregnancy, like you're not, but if you were, like we would still consider it a fertile day because we consider like mucus as an indication of fertility just to be on the safe side. But ultimately it's not optimal, but it's also different. So there's also a clear shift in the quality of your mucus post-ovulation. So if this pattern were to continue, like I have worked with clients where because there's an obvious shift in the quality of their mucus, they actually get to the point where they've seen it so consistently that they can tell based on also the temperatures. We can confirm that ovulation has happened with the temperatures. We can confirm that this mucus is like we've already ovulated, so we know that we're outside of the fertile window, like we've confirmed it with temperature. And so then that's a situation where we actually can consider using yellow stamp management, but only if it's a situation that actually persists, like only if it's like June and we're seeing a pattern of, So I would anticipate that with some support, like I talked about nutritional support for the cervix and different things like that, we would see an improvement. So basically this is kind of like one of those to be continued. At this stage, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would kind of put a pin in it, start like up the nutrition, like you're doing a lot of things, you're preparing for pregnancy. So you've also got nutrition on your mind. And we want to have that thought in our head of like, okay, we're replenishing nutrients, preparing for pregnancy. That's all going to help your cervical mucus production and cervical health and all that. And so, but if we continue to see it, then we could look at like charting it a little differently. If it falls under the category of yellow stamp management, there's an obvious shift from your fertile window from what I see in this case. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Like, I feel like it would be a bigger thing if we were fully seeing like regular, like you're still having like egg white quality mucus all day for like 5 days after. Like that would be a different thing, but we're seeing mucus of a different quality. There's a clear shift around ovulation. It's just remnants. Your body's just figuring itself out right now. Okay. And then in terms of, you had questions about like the stamps, like how to mark everything down. The only thing I would say, it's a little different when you're using the paper chart and some markers. So one of the things that you would note is, the difference on the chart between peak mucus and non-peak mucus. How comfortable are you kind of between the two?
Well, because I went on the Justice app today and I entered in I I entered in this chart onto the app and it kept telling me, no, that can't be purple. Or no, that can't be light purple. It has to be dark purple. And I was like, huh? Because with my pen, I didn't notice that. But I guess learning from that, anything that's like a 6, so less than a fourth of an inch stretch, would be light purple and technically not a peak mucus. And then anything that's more than half an inch would be dark purple. But then it also was like kind of yelling at me and saying, you can't have that sensation with that mucus.
Yeah. So this is pretty much something that I was mentioning before, which is that like when if you have a smaller amount in quantity, then you could wipe and it doesn't feel lubricative, even though it's a peak day. So in a perfect world, every time that you had peak mucus, you would have a lubricative sensation. But obviously, there are times when you just are not producing a significant quantity. And so even though it is a peak day and you have peak mucus, it's not giving you lubricative sensation. So that's one of the challenges with the app because it doesn't allow you to just put that in.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's just one of those things. Like you would just have to kind of like, it was smooth, but you're going to have to put a lubricative. So for instance, I'm pointing with my finger as if you can see. So on day 13 here, so you had a smooth sensation, but you did have mucus that was cloudy and clear that you could stretch to an inch.
Yeah.
And you saw that twice. So that's a peak day. That's a dark purple sticker. Like that's a peak mucus. And so like then on the day 14, you also had mucus that was clear and stretchy. And so that's a peak observation. And then on the 15th, you had mucus that was cloudy and it only stretched a little. So like lotion. And so that's non-peak. So peak is clear, stretchy, or slippery / lubricative. And then non-peak is basically everything else. So if you have mucus that is not clear, it has to stretch an inch or more before we would call it peak.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it looks like, you've entered everything here correctly. You've been really diligent with your observations, which is really good for the first chart. So how do you feel about what we've talked about so far? Are there still other questions and things that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
I think we've covered most of what I wanted to talk about. One burning question a little bit that I have is Michael is supposed to get a semen analysis within the next week or so. And so that might, right now we're having sex every day for what seems like a month. We're not, but 8 days in a row. And then how do I know then, sorry, that's my bedtime. How do I know if we're going to land sex on peak day if I don't know when peak day comes and we're doing it every other day instead of every single day? Because I think that's one of the things that I was in my head, I was thinking, this cycle, we should only have sex every other day. But then once I started having mucus and then I was like, but I don't know when it's going to end. We need to just have sex every single day that I have mucus. How am I going to time that?
Well, you don't have
when I don't know when peak day is.
You don't have to have because you don't know that it's peak day on peak day.
Right.
So, the thought behind having sex every other day, alternating days, is that if you happen to, if you find out or you suspect that your partner potentially has a low count or a low morphology, the thought behind it is that by alternating days, you're giving the sperm a little bit of time to build up. So men do produce sperm every day, but for anyone, you included, but for anyone who has done a semen analysis, they actually ask your partner to not ejaculate for several days before they test it. So even if you think about it from that perspective, they ask him to not ejaculate for several days before. So when you get the analysis, it's actually telling you the concentration based on him not ejaculating for a couple of days. So you don't take it to the extreme because it's also not good on the other end to never ejaculate. They have there's a balance here. Okay. So that's the purpose of it. And basically any day that you have peak mucus is a fertile day. And if you don't hit peak day, it's fine. If you identify that it's peak day, then the recommendation is to have sex on peak day and then the 2 days after, just to cover your bases.
Okay.
One thing I should mention is that there's a bunch of research that has been done about women coming off of hormonal birth control. And so every individual woman is different, but there's a trend that there's a natural delay in the return of your normal fertility that is kind of, it's noted and it's there. And so one study I've mentioned a couple times, they actually compared women who had been on hormonal birth control, and they actually compared long-term use to short-term use, which they define long-term as 2 years or more. So for women that were coming off of the pill, who had used it for 2 years or more, on average, it took them twice as long to conceive. And that's because the parameters are different. And so the challenge is that when you first come off of it, if you are having sex and you don't get pregnant right away, of course, it starts to feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. So I'm not sure if this is helpful or not, but it's worth noting that there is a actual kind of noted suppression in your ability to, I mean, we all know that some women get pregnant right away. So we just we don't know how it's going to affect us. But I wouldn't start panicking right now and thinking that the reason you're not getting pregnant is because you're not having enough sex or you're not timing it right. Like, you're having sex on all the right days. So once you get the semen analysis, you'll have an idea. That's a really good idea to get it done sooner than later so that you can just see where you're at and if there's anything wrong on his end or if it's good. So, but at the same time,
are we like...
Oh, I was just going to say, like, you just want to keep in mind, like, it takes anywhere from 6 to even like 9 or 12 months before your fertility kind of starts to return back to normal, just so that you're not freaking out yet.
Okay.
Don't freak out yet.
That's what I tend to do.
Sorry, you were going to ask something.
I forgot. I think it was, are we jumping the gun by getting a semen analysis so soon and are trying to conceive? Is that like we should wait until after those 9 months and then that's like one of the first fertility tests that we do? Or like, because he hasn't actually, the doctor, I guess he called today and they were like, what? Yeah, I can't remember the funny thing he said. They sounded like he asked them something funny. I don't know. But they couldn't schedule it because they had no idea what he was talking about. So technically it's not scheduled, but he's got it on the list.
Based on my understanding, if there's an issue with sperm quality, you're going to want to know sooner than later. So I feel like it's just a good, you've probably listened to, I did 2 specific episodes with Mark Sklar, which I'll link to in the show notes about it. It's important it's like anything else. I think information is helpful and it's good to rule things out. It doesn't make any sense to kind of, if you have the opportunity to test it early, because imagine if you're trying for a year only to find out after a year that there's actually an issue with your partner's sperm count. So having that information sooner than later gives him the opportunity to make any changes that he needs to make and attend to things, because the end of 6 months from now will arrive regardless. And so you may as well let it arrive with better sperm.
Okay.
Right? Like, it's going to come anyways. So,
yeah.
And while your fertility is returning, and like we can see in your charts, there's already a difference between the first couple of charts and this one. And we're going to continue to see improvement. So while your body is acclimatizing, it makes sense if there's an issue on his end for him to also be working on that.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've covered quite a bit. We talked a little bit about the charting aspect and all of that. And we still have, I'm sure we can still delve a little bit deeper into your charts in our upcoming sessions. So Aubrey and I have sessions within the group, hot seat sessions. And we also have our private consult, an additional one. So we still have lots of time. And what's great about the group too is that we'll still, by the time we meet again, we'll either have a whole other half chart or you'll be pregnant. But we'll have...
Yeah, I think my hot seat's next Tuesday, actually. So...
Okay, so then we'll be able to, see the end of this chart. So either way, what happens? And then by the time we're having our next set, that's what I like about it, because it's helpful to be able to go through a couple of charts together to really see what's happening, to see trends. I find it to be difficult to actually make conclusions based on one chart. You've probably gotten that sense. We can't really jump to conclusions based on one chart. Like sometimes you'll see things that are quite obvious that we need to look at. which is it's good. That's the whole point. But other times, especially in your specific situation with such a recent hormonal birth control history, there's a little bit of that wait and see, like not wait and do nothing and see, but like wait and see while we do other things. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our session today. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what your experience has been so far in the group, especially because there's women listening who are like, what the heck is this group thing that they're talking about? And so maybe you could share a little bit about what your experience has been like, or why you decided to join.
Well, I think it's been really awesome. For real, looking back at my other way of charting, like just using an app, it's like so incomplete. So we learn a lot about like different things. It's really nice to see someone else's chart and get talked to about it. Like on my app, I can like look at other people's charts, but like I don't get to ask the questions and have the conversation and like someone knowledgeable to like explain what I'm seeing. So like a lot of like the chat rooms or whatever, you can like look at someone's chart and then there's a lot of speculation, like, oh, it looks like you ovulated this day, or like, are you taking your temperature at the same time? So it seems really redundant. Whereas like in the group sessions, we like focus on one person for half an hour and like all the questions are asked and you can see what does maybe low thyroid look like, or thyroid function, or what does spotting look like on a chart, or how do we note it? And I think at least going forward, I'm really glad, Lisa, to have you help me like understand, so that whether or not in the 3 months that we're working together, I can get pregnant or do get pregnant or whatever. But like after that, and then after a pregnancy, I know how to like notate the birth control stuff too, like using the charting as the birth control. So I don't know. I've learned a lot so far, and then we're only like a month in. So
well, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing it. Yeah, I think that it's sometimes hard to kind of explain. So it's kind of nice when I don't have to.
Yeah. It's good.
Well, thank you, Aubrey. And then for anyone who's listening and they're on hormonal contraceptives and they've just discovered the podcast and they're feeling that kind of natural sense of terror, the thought of coming off of it, what advice, if any, would you want to give to her?
I don't know. I went off of it and I'm really, really glad I went off of it. I know, like, my honest thought is like, get off of it right now. Like, if I could have talked to myself 4 years ago, I would have been like, don't do it anymore. It's not worth it. Or even going on it in the first place was a different reason. But like, I've been with the same partner for 4 years, and like, I feel like me again. And I feel like smarter than doctors, like that I don't have to be on the pill because I can notice my body's natural signs. Like, I went to a gyno once who looked at me with crazy eyes because I was like, she's like, what are you using? And I was like, nothing. But that was also because I didn't know, like, there is information out there. Maybe join the group session and Lisa can help you, or else do some research. But for me, I would say to myself, I would have said, get off of it right now.
Yeah, no,
that sounds mean. I'm sorry, people. Just if I was talking to myself, that's what, if I always knew I wanted a family. And so like, if I knew then that I needed to be off of it for 2 years to like build nutrient reserves or like make sure my cycle's healthy, like I would have done it because I knew that I wanted to have kids. But like, I didn't know that 2 years ago. I knew that 4 months ago. So
yeah. Well, I think I'm glad that you said that, and I appreciate that. It's hard. As women, we're all just making the best decisions, and ultimately I've used the pill. We've all, like, most women, most of us have used it, and we all have different reasons for using it. And so I don't think there's like a right or wrong answer here. But yeah, like from my end, like from my perspective, and as you know, why we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, is that there is a very real transition phase that happens when you come off of hormonal contraceptives. And when you're in my line of work, we see the chart. And so I can physically see the difference between the chart of a woman who's recently come off of hormonal birth control. It's not always the same. Every woman is different. There's different factors that come into play versus a woman who's never used it and doesn't have any like endocrine issues or whatever. So there's it's a temporary phase. Like your body does like move on. It's not like like your body definitely does move on, but the challenge is most women are not prepared for that phase and the potential that it could take longer than you thought for the conception to occur. So we will keep our fingers crossed and see what happens with your charts in the next 6 weeks.
All righty.
All right, Aubrey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/184. That's fertilityfriday.com/184. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Aubrey. It's always a treat to be able to do these on-air client sessions. And I really appreciate you, Aubrey, for coming on the show and sharing your story. I know it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, especially when you know that it's a very private, public conversation, because when we're recording it, it's just you and I, Aubrey, but then when I air it, of course, there's thousands of women listening in. So I really appreciate you, Aubrey, and also all of the other women who have taken part in the Fertility Awareness Reality Series. I know that a lot of the women who jump in and do these calls, a big part of it is to just share their own experience and kind of put it out there to raise awareness about this. It's one of those common sentiments that really we're not taught how our body works, and we're not taught about the menstrual cycle in school in this type of depth. We are taught that we have one, but we're not taught about cervical mucus and what it means, and we're not taught that there's only a small window of fertility in each month, and we're certainly not taught that we can actually gather information from our menstrual cycle about our health and our fertility and use our cycles as a way to kind of gauge where we're at. I think that's one of my favorite parts about charting, which is that you can, once you really just get it down the basics and you get the hang of charting and monitoring your signs, and once you know all the rules and you can kind of figure all of that stuff out, from cycle to cycle, from chart to chart, you're really able to experiment and try new things. So if you're trying, I know a lot of my clients are really into health, into fitness. So if you're trying a new exercise routine, you can actually use your chart to monitor whether your exercise routine is, like, whether or not it's too intense or not. So for instance, I've worked with a number of clients who will start exercising and all of a sudden they start spotting in their post-ovulatory phase, and then they kind of take a break for the next cycle and they'll see that the spotting goes away. So that's just one example of how you can actually work with your chart, work with your cycle, and take that feedback from cycle to cycle on what's going on in your life, how things are going, and even giving you some insight into how to go about some of the different changes that you're looking to make. So I really appreciate all of you for listening to today's episode, for sharing the show with your friends, for spreading the word. Ultimately, I have a vision, and my vision is for all women to understand how their body works, and to really just for all of our daughters, the next generation of women, to just be able to take for granted that they were taught how their bodies work. They were taught about their menstrual cycles. They were taught about their fertile window, and they're able to really make informed choices, whether that's with regards to how they want to manage their fertility, what type of birth control they want to use when they choose to have children, and also not feeling like the only option to manage their fertility is a drug that can have an effect, even if it's temporary, but have an effect on the menstrual cycle and the health of your cycle. So that's my vision, really, to shift the way that women are taught about our cycles so that we can all make informed decisions about our own health and our own fertility. So with that said, thanks again for being here with me today. And as always, be well and happy charting.